As we battle over election fairness and election integrity, we should all remember that working the polls on election day is for some a family tradition.
I love the people. I love helping the people.
And last November, Cynthia DeCommon wanted to follow in her dad's footsteps.
He just turned 82, so at his 82nd birthday, they acknowledged like he had been working for the voting for 20, 25 years.
But instead of civic pride after it was over, Cynthia became an eyewitness to an absolute disaster on election day.
I felt horrible. I felt bad for the people because I was like, this isn't fair.
Cynthia was the alternate precinct judge at Precinct 10, the Baker Ripley Center on Navigation Boulevard.
Last night, we spoke to plenty of frustrated voters who tried to cast their ballots but weren't able to do so because of legal issues surrounding the polls being open for an extra hour.
At 5 o'clock on Election Day, the Texas Organizing Project had rushed into court to get Judge Dawn Rogers to order an extra hour of voting. And they highlighted the voting problems at Baker Ripley.
She says when she heard there was an extra hour last night, she thought it was a sign and got down here to Baker Ripley. But things didn't go as planned.
Lawyers had already secured multiple written declarations from voters angry at delays in openings at 5 polls, including 2 of the 3 Baker Ripley voting locations. The folks at top must be pretty prepared for a polling crisis like that. There was a sworn affidavit from a top organizer who just happened to choose Baker Ripley to watch morning voters. A fortunate choice considering there were 782 separate polling locations.
Yes, so we understand that there was a miscommunication between the judge and our staff in getting supplies here.
That's what Clifford Tatum told KHOU on Election Day, after the TV camera showed up at the Ripley house to find out what the heck was going wrong on Election Day.
So we're assessing what's actually going on here. We're not sure, so I don't want to speculate.
Since then, our appointed election boss, your county attorney, and the Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo have put up a wall of secrecy about Election Day problems. They have even sued the state to keep election communications a secret.
County Judge, will you talk to us about the election records, please, and the public records request?
Shine a light on what happened on election night in Harris County, and if it's all good, great. If it's a problem, let's address it. Let's hold people accountable.
Ever since Mattress Mac asked us to investigate, one of our missions was to find the people who ran Precinct 10 that day. Some folks think what happened at Baker Ripley that day was no accident. That's why we went looking for Cynthia. She was the second in command that day.
How do I describe it? To me, it was a disgrace.
And this will only fuel allegations the Baker Ripley voting disaster was not an accident, but pre-planned to help Democrats gain a last-hour advantage or have an election day challenge if they lost.
You think it happened on purpose?
I believe it did. If it continues to repeat itself, it's speaking volume right there.
Cynthia says she arrived at 6:30 that morning.
Yes.
You'd never been there before?
Never been there before.
Knew nothing about it?
Knew nothing about it.
Okay.
The door to the polling location was locked. When Cynthia finally found a way back in, she found that nothing was set up. Not one of the 18 voting machines.
Well, apparently they were supposed to set it up the day before. Is what the ladies told me. They should have done this at 5:30 the day before. And we walked in at 6:30 and there was nothing set up. And people were in line.
Since the election, you've heard Clifford Tatum try to blame the Astros championship parade as some kind of an excuse why some polls weren't set up. Tatum's office won't tell us if that's the story we're supposed to believe about Baker Ripley.
People were in line already?
Yeah.
And there was nothing set up?
Nothing set up.
And who was there? It was you?
It was me and the gentleman that was selected as a judge. And we had no workers. No workers. I felt horrible, but I knew it was my job as a citizen to get that place going, because how would I feel if I couldn't vote? You know what I'm saying?
Cynthia says the technician didn't even know how to set up the voting machines.
We were all like calling people on the phone because hey, we need help. And every time we called the Harris County line, it was busy. We never got through to anybody.
A call to a friend at another poll helped get another technician there who knew how to set up the machines. By then it was 9:30 a.m.
He helped her to set a couple of them up and just gave her like example how to do it. And then he left. And he's the one that had the key that was supposed to turn on every single one so the voting process could begin.
Cynthia says the polls finally opened up at 11:30 that morning, but still no election volunteers to help.
We have no workers, we have no one to help us run all this. And that's why the people were even more angry.
Volunteers didn't arrive until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Cynthia was told not to bother with swearing in any of the workers.
Then that's when I heard later on down the road that some places didn't have enough paper.
That was never a problem at Baker Ripley. In fact, just an hour before the emergency court hearing, a huge resupply of ballot paper showed up at Baker Ripley.
And I said to the judge, "Did you order this extra paper?" He said, "No." I said, "I didn't request it or order it." I said, "We have more than enough paper."
You notice we said Cynthia was second in command that day. One of the few records Clifford Tatum would allow us to see was a list of precinct judges. For Precinct 10, it was a guy named John Ether. Quoting, "I was the election judge on that day of madness," he emailed us. He would not agree to talk to us by phone. Tatum's office confirms that John Ether had never worked at an election day poll before, even as a volunteer, which could explain what Cynthia told us.
The gentleman, the judge, didn't know anything either. I mean, I thank God that I worked the early voting.
A transcript of that emergency hearing late on Election Day shows county lawyers tried to downplay ballot paper problems. And since the election, Democrats have tried to even dispute the maps, proving that ballot shortages happened in mostly Republican strongholds.
Thousands of voters were turned away. This is real voter suppression.
How does this happen? How do you run out of paper?
I asked Elections Administrator Tatum if there was an issue with the supply, with the vendor rather, and he said no, we had ample supply.
The Harris County Democratic Party has tried to force KHOU to retract their investigation that helped expose the ballot shortages, saying it's part of right-wing extremism. The county attorney has even made it a racial issue in the New York Times, quoting, "As a black man whose grandfather paid a poll tax, the whole ordeal is infuriating. It's a complete misuse of the word disenfranchisement from people who, by the way, are still working to disenfranchise folks." Cynthia calls the ballot shortages disgusting and applauds the lawsuit Mac and I filed to get election communications made public. Your tax dollars are now being used to fight the truth.
The truth needs to come out and those papers need to be released. Let it go. Let it go.
What happened at Baker Ripley demands more complete answers from Clifford Tatum. Answers he so far has refused to give us. On election morning, a lawyer at the Secretary of State's office at 9:05 a.m. reported complaints to Tatum about 3 different polling locations that had opened late. Tatum responded an hour later at 10:08, quoting, "We have addressed all late openings and everyone should be online." That wasn't true. Baker Ripley didn't open until after 11:30 a.m. Tatum refused to produce his email communications with the Secretary of State, but we're getting many of them from another source. But what happened at Baker Ripley wasn't just miscommunication, it was a disaster. And it won't help the perception from some Republicans that the fix was in when we tell you that Baker Ripley has received $164 million in government contracts from Harris County since Lena Hidalgo took office. Maybe it's just another coincidence, like the maps that seem to show ballot paper shortages were almost all in traditional Republican strongholds. But lawmakers in Austin, they're not waiting, inching closer to a law that would require an elected public official to run our voting again.
Each election seems to bring a new and bigger disaster than the last.